Hello, guys and gals, and this is a book of two of J.R.R. Tolkien's short stories. One is Smith of Wootton Major, and one is Farmer Giles of Ham. And this was among the books that my uncle owned. And so, yeah, we're going to be reading this book. We can read this really quick. It says, Farmer Giles and the Dragon. "Excuse me," said the dragon, "but were you looking for me by any chance?" "No, indeed," said the farmer. Who'd have thought of seeing you here? I was just going for a ride." "As you like," said Chrysophylax. I will refine that name eventually. Licking his lips again, but pretending to close his eyes. He had a wicked heart, as all dragons have, but not a very bold one, as is not unusual. He preferred a meal that did not that he did not have to fight for. But appetite had returned after a good long sleep. The parson of Oakley had been stringy, and it was years since he had tasted a large fat man, and now had made up his mind to try this easy meat. And he was only waiting until the old fool was off his guard. But the old fool was not as foolish as he looked. So yeah, that is just a taste, I guess. First of all, copyright information. That's always important. Okay, it says right here, copyright 1967, copyright 1949, all rights reserved. Published in the United States. It doesn't say anything about not publishing it on YouTube, so I'm taking that as a... And we have an image here. We will start reading right now. There was a village once, not very long ago for those with long memories, not very far away for those with long legs. Wootton Major, it was called because it was larger than Wootton Minor. A few miles away, deep in the trees, but it was not very large, though it was at that time prosperous, and a fair number of folks lived in it, good, bad, and mixed, as is usual. It was a remarkable village in its way, being well known in the country round about for the skill of its workers in various crafts, but most of all for its cooking. It had a large kitchen which belonged to the village council and the master cook, not to be confused with master chef. Was an important person. Master cook was an important person. The cook's house and the kitchen adjoined the great hall, the largest and oldest building in the place, and most beautiful. It was built of good stone and good oak, and was... I believe this first story is 50 pages. Well tended, though it was no longer painted or gilded, as it had been once upon a time. In the hall, the villagers held their meetings and debates, and their public feasts, and their family gatherings. So the cook was kept busy, since for all these occasions he had to provide suitable fare. For the festivals, of which there were many in the course of a year, the fare that was thought suitable was plentiful and rich. There was one festival to which all looked forward, and it was the only one held in winter. It went on for a week, and on its last day at sundown, there was a merrymaking called the Feast of Good Children, to which not many were invited. No doubt some who deserved to be asked were overlooked, and some who did not were invited by mistake. For that was the way of things, however careful those who arrange such matters may try to be. In any case, it was largely by chance of a birthday that any child came for the 24 festival. 24 feast, rather. I don't know why I said festival, it's feast. For the 24 feast. Since that was only held once in 24 years, and only 24 children were invited. For that decision, the master cook was expected to do his best, and in addition to many other good things, it was the custom for him to make the great cake. By the excellence, or otherwise, his name was chiefly remembered, for a master cook seldom, if ever, lasted long enough in office to make a second great cake. There came a time, however, when the reigning master cook, to everyone's surprise, since it had never happened before, suddenly announced that he needed a holiday, and he went away. No one knew where, and when he came back some months later, he seemed rather changed. He had been a kind man who liked to see other people enjoying themselves, but he was himself serious, and said very little. Now he was merrier, and often said and did most laughable things, and at feasts he would himself sing gay songs, which was not expected of master cooks. Also, he brought back with him an apprentice, and that astonished the village. It was not astonishing for the master cook to have an apprentice. It was usual. The master chose one in due time, and he taught him all that he could. And as they both grew older, the apprentice took on more of the important work, so that when the master retired or died, there he was, ready to take over the office and become master cook in his turn. But this master had never chosen an apprentice. He had always said, "Time enough yet. Time enough yet." Or, "I'm keeping my eyes open. I'll choose one when I find one to suit me." But now he brought with him a mere boy, and not one from the village. He was more lithe than the Wootton lads, and quicker, soft-spoken and very polite, but ridiculously young for the work. Barely in his teens by the look of him. Still, choosing his apprentice was the master cook's affair, and no one had the right to interfere in it. So the boy remained and stayed in the cook's house until he was old enough to find lodging for himself. People soon became used to seeing him about, and he made a few friends. They and the cook called him Alf. Kind of like the alien, Alf. But to the rest, he was just Prentice. The next surprise came only 3 years later. One spring morning, the master cook took off his tall white hat, folded up his clean apron, hung up his white coat, took a stout ash stick and a small bag, and departed. He said goodbye to the apprentice. No one else was about. "Goodbye for now, Alf," he said. "I leave you to manage things as best you can, which is always very well. I expect it will turn out all right. If we meet again, I hope to hear all about it. Tell them that I've gone on another holiday, but this time I shan't be coming back again." This was quite a stir in the village when Prentice gave the message to the people who came to the kitchen. "What a thing to do," they said, "and without warning or farewell. What are we going to do without any master cook? He has left no one to take his place. In all their discussions, no one ever thought of making young Prentice into cook. Okay. He had grown a bit taller, but still looked like a boy, and he still only served for 3 years. He still had only served for 3 years. In the end, for lack of anyone better, they appointed a man of the village who could cook well enough in a small way. When he was younger, he had helped the master at busy times, but the master had never taken to him and would never have him as apprentice. He was now a solid sort of man with a wife and children, and careful with money. At any rate, he won't go off without notice, they said, and poor cooking is better than none. It was 7 years until the great cake, and by that time he should be able to manage it. Noakes, for that was his name, was very pleased with the turn things had taken. He had always wished to become master cook, and he had never doubted that he could manage it. For some time, when he was alone in the kitchen, he used to put on the tall white hat and look at himself in a polished frying pan and say, "How do you do, master? That hat suits you properly. Might have been made for you. I hope things go well with you." Things went well enough, for at first Noakes did his best, and he had Prentice to help him. Indeed, he learned a lot from him by watching him slyly, though that Noakes never admitted. But in due course, the time for the 24 feast drew near, and Noakes had to think about making the great cake. Secretly, he was worried about it, for although with 7 years' practice he could turn out passable cakes and pastries for ordinary occasions, he knew that his great cake would be eagerly awaited and would have to satisfy severe critics. Not only the children. A smaller cake of the same material and baking had to be provided for those who came to help at the feast. Also, it was expected that the great cake should have something novel and surprising about it, and not be a mere repetition of the one before. His chief notion was that it should be very sweet and rich, and he decided that it should be entirely covered in sugar icing, at which Prentice had a clever hand. That will make it pretty and fairy-like, he thought. Fairies and sweets were two of the very few notions he had about the tastes of children. Fairies, he thought one grew out of, but of sweets he remained very fond. Ah, fairy-like, he said. That gives me an idea. And so it came into his head that he would stick a little doll on a pinnacle in the middle of the cake, dressed all in white, with a little wand in her hand, ending in a tinsel star, the fairy queen written in pink icing around her feet. But when he began preparing the materials for the cake making, he found that he had only dim memories of what should go inside the great cake. So he looked in some old books of recipes left behind by previous cooks. They puzzled him, even when he could make out their handwriting, for they mentioned many things that he had not heard of, and some that he had forgotten, and now had no time to get. But he thought he might try one or two of the spices that the book spoke of. He scratched his head and remembered an old black box with several different compartments in which the last cook had once kept spices and other things for special cakes. He had not looked at it since he took over, but after a search he found it on a high shelf in the storeroom. He took it down and blew the dust off the lid. But when he opened it, he found that very little of the spices was left, and they were dry and musty. But in one compartment in the corner, he discovered a small star, hardly as big as one of our sixpences, black-looking as if it were made of silver, but was tarnished. "That's funny," he said, as he held it to the light. "No, it isn't," said a voice behind him, so suddenly that he jumped. It was the voice of Prentice, and he had never spoken to the master in that tone before. Indeed, he seldom spoke to Noakes at all, unless he was spoken to first. Very right and proper in a youngster. He might be clever with icing, but he had a lot to learn. Yet. That was Noakes's opinion. 15. 15. Okay, I'm trying to get these pages to turn. Here we are. Here we are. "What do you mean, young fellow?" he said, not much pleased. "If it isn't funny, what is it?" "It is fey," said Prentice. "It comes from fairy." Then the cook laughed. All right, he said. It means much the same, but call it that if you like. You'll grow up someday. Now you can get on with stoning the raisins. If you notice any funny fairy ones, tell me." "What are you going to do with the star, master?" said Prentice. "Put it into the cake, of course," said the cook. "Just the thing, especially if it's fairy," he sniggered. "I dare say You've been to children's parties yourself, and not so long ago either, where little trinkets like this were stirred into the mixture, and little coins and whatnot. Anyways, we do that in this village to amuse the children. But this isn't a trinket, master. It is a fey star, said Prentice. You said that already, snapped the cook. Very well, I'll tell the children. It'll make them laugh. I don't think it will, master, said Prentice. But it's the right thing to do. Quite right. Who do you think you're talking to? Said Noakes. In time, the cake was made and baked and iced, mostly by Prentice. As you are so set on fairies, I'll let you make the fairy queen, Noakes said to him. Very good, master, he answered. I'll do it if you are too busy, but it was your idea and not mine. It's my place to have ideas and not yours, said Noakes. At the feast, a cake stood in the middle of the long table, inside the ring of 24 red candles. Its top rose into a small white mountain, up the sides of which grew little trees glittering as if with frost. On its summit stood a tiny white figure on one foot, like a snow maiden dancing. And in her hand was a minute wand of ice, sparkling with light. The children looked at it with wide eyes, and one or two clapped their hands, crying, "Isn't it pretty and fairy-like?" That delighted the cook, but the apprentice looked displeased. They were both present. The master to cut up the cake when the time came, and the apprentice to sharpen the knife and hand it to him. At last the cook took the knife and stepped up to the table. I should tell you, my dears, he said, that inside this lovely icing there is a cake made of many nice things to eat, but also stirring well in there are many pretty things, trinkets and little coins and whatnot. And I'm told that let's put a picture here. There is the big old grand cake. There's Prentice and Noakes and 24 children. Okay. That there is a lucky to find. Oh, let me go back. Sorry. I'm told that it is lucky to find one in your slice. There are 24 in the cake, so there should be one for each of you. If the fairy queen plays fair, but she doesn't always do so, she's a tricky little creature. You asked Mr. Prentice. The apprentice turned away and studied the faces of the children. No, I'm forgetting, said the cook. There's 25 this evening. There's also a little silver star, a special magic one, or so Mr. Prentice says, so be careful. If you break one of your pretty front teeth on it, the magic star won't mend it, but I expect it's a especially lucky thing to find all the same. It was a good cake, and no one had any fault to find with it except that it was no bigger than was needed. When it was all cut up, there was a large slice for each of the children, but nothing left over. No coming again. The slices soon disappeared, and every now and then a trinket or a coin was discovered. Some found one, and some found two, and several found none. For that is the way luck goes, whether there is a doll with a wand on the cake or not. But when the cake was all eaten, there was no sign of any magic star. Bless me, said the cook. Then it can't have been made of silver after all. It must have melted, or perhaps Mr. Prentice was right, and it was really magical, and it just vanished and gone back to fairyland. Not a nice trick to play, I don't think. He looked at Prentice with a smirk, and Prentice looked at him with dark eyes and did not smile at all. All the same, the silver star was indeed a fey star. The apprentice was not one to make mistakes about things of that sort. What had happened was that one of the boys at the feast had swallowed it without even noticing it, although he had found a silver coin in his slice and had given it to Nell, the little girl next to him. She looked so disappointed at finding nothing lucky in hers. He sometimes wondered what had really become of the star, and did not know that it had remained with him, tucked away in some place where it could not be felt, for that was what it was intended to do. There it waited for a long time until its day came. The feast had been in midwinter, but it was now June, and the night was hardly dark at all. The boy got up before dawn, for he did not wish to sleep. It was his 10th birthday. He looked out of the window, and the world seemed quiet and expectant. A little breeze, cool and fragrant, stirred the waking trees. Then the dawn came, and far away he heard the dawn song of the birds beginning, growing as it came towards him until it rushed over him, filling all the land around the house, and passed on like a wave of music into the west. As the sun rose above the rim of the world, "It reminds me of Fairy," he heard himself say. But in Fairy the people sing too. They had begun to sing high and clear in strange words, but he seemed to know by heart. He seemed to know by heart. And in that moment the star fell out of his mouth, and he caught it on his open hand. It was bright silver now, glistening in the sunlight, but it quivered and rose a little as if it were about to fly away. Without thinking, he clapped his hand to his head, and there the star stayed in the middle of his forehead, and he wore it for many years. The people in the village noticed it, though it was not invisible to attentive eyes, but it became part of his face, and it did not usually shine at all. Some of its light passed into his eyes and his voice, which had begun to grow beautiful as soon as the star came to him, because even more beautiful as he grew. Let me read this sentence again. This is kind of a long sentence. Few people in the village noticed it, though it was not invisible to it was not invisible to attentive eyes, but it became part of his face, and it did not usually shine at all. Some of its light passed into his eyes, and his voice, which had begun to grow beautiful as soon as the star came to him, became even more beautiful as he grew up, people liking to hear him speak, even if it was no more than a good morning. He became well known in his country, and not only in his own village, but in many others round about. For the good workmanship, his father was a smith, and he followed him in his craft, and bettered it. Smithson he was called, while his father was still alive, and then just Smith. For by the time he was the best smith between Far Easton and the West Wood, and he could make all kinds of things of iron in his smithy. Most of them, of course, were plain and useful, meant for daily needs. Farm tools, carpenter's tools, kitchen tools, and pots and pans, bars and bolts and hinges, pot hooks, fire dogs and horseshoes, and the like. They were strong and lasting, but they also had a grace about them, being shapely in their kinds, good to handle and to look at. But some things, when he had time to make for delight, and they were beautiful, for he could work iron into wonderful forms that looked as light and delicate as a spray of leaves and blossoms, but kept the stern strength of iron, or seemed even stronger. Few could pass by one of the gates or lattices that he had made without stopping to admire it. No one could pass through it once it was shut. He sang when it sang when he was making things of this sort, and when Smith began to sing, those nearby stopped their own work and came to the smithy to listen. That was all that most people knew about him. It was enough indeed that more than most men and women in the village achieved, even those who were skilled and hard-working. But there was more to know, for Smith became acquainted with fairy, and some regions of it he knew it as well as any mortal can, though since too many had become like Noakes, he spoke of this to few people, except his wife and his children. His wife was 23. Let me see if I can get the pages apart. There we go. 24. Okay, here we go. Nell, to whom he gave the silver coin, and his daughter was Nan, and her son was Ned Smithson. From them it could not have been kept secret anyway, for they sometimes saw that star shining on his forehead when he came back from one of the long walks he would take alone now and then in the evening, or when he returned from a journey. From time to time he would go off, sometimes walking, sometimes riding, and it was generally supposed that it was on business, and sometimes it was and sometimes it was not. At any rate, not to get orders for work or to buy pig iron and charcoal and other supplies, though he attended to such things with care and knew how to turn an honest penny into 2 pence, as the saying went. But he had business of its own kind in Fairy, and he was welcome there, for the star shone bright on his brow, and he was as safe as a mortal can be in the perilous country. The lesser evils avoided the star, and from the greater evils he was guarded. For that he was grateful, for he soon became wise and understood that the marvels of Fairy cannot be approached without danger, and that many of the evils cannot be challenged without weapons of power too great for any mortal to wield. He remained a learner and explorer, not a warrior, and though in time he could have forged weapons that in his own world would have been powerful enough to become that would have had power enough to become the matter of great tales. Okay, and there is a picture. And be worth a king's ransom. He knew that in Fairy they would have been of small account. So among all the things that he made, it is not remembered that he even forged a sword or spear or an arrowhead. We're going to stop it right here and pick this up when we this is upside down. In the next video. The picture on the front is by the brothers Hildebrand. I do remember that. Hildebrandt. And, we have been reading from J.R.R. Tolkien, Smith of Wootton Major. And, it's really a good book. Got my dragon bookmark in here. And, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.